Welcome to Bluegrass Brooklyn, our podcast all about the music we love, straight from the Bluegrass borough of Brooklyn, New York.
Hello, and welcome to this Monday edition of the Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast. I'm your host, Liz Wolfe, and in these editions, we explore topics that are related to and supporting our favorite music, bluegrass. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast. My name is Liz Wolfe, and I have on a very special guest today, my co-host, Mike Willner. But I also have Kieth Billik on, who is the host of the Picky Fingers podcast. So welcome to both of you.
Hey.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Mike.
So we decided to do this episode because we started a podcast. And we're very inspired by other people who have podcasts, and Kieth's podcast, The Picky Fingers, which is mainly banjo focused, is a very successful, popular podcast that's out there right now. So we're drawing inspiration from other people. And we thought it would be fun to interview Kieth, but also for me to interview Mike, since he's really the person that started with his efforts, our beloved Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I would like to start out by saying, so Kieth, there you were, a young man of 12 or whatever, and you said, I'm going to play the banjo and then someday start a podcast. Is that how it happened?
Yeah, I wish. I would probably be quite a bit ahead of where I am now. No, I waited until I was about 21 to pick up the banjo, and then sometime quite a bit after that to do the podcast. And I'm happy to go into specifics, but no, it wasn't quite that foregone of a path.
You know, because we always imagine and encourage children from a very young age to think, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I don't know how often become a banjo player and have a podcast comes up in those early conversations. So I'm guessing it didn't come up for you.
No, I mean, I don't think podcasts existed when I was a kid. So there's that. That probably took care of that right away. No, I've always been interested in music, but no, the banjo didn't really occur to me until it was happening, essentially.
Okay. And so, Mike, same for you. There you were as a young professional, maybe, I don't know. And you said, someday I'm going to do this bluegrass thing. It's going to take over my whole life. And I'm going to also start a podcast. Did that ever?
Yes, that's exactly how it happened for me, except what happened was I made the mistake at about age 66 or so of being in the late and much missed Sam Ash music store, pulled a banjo off the wall, strummed it, and said, oh, this sounds like fun because it's an open G chord. And then I started plucking strings and, wow, this could be fun. And I got one of the wonderful Deering Good Time banjos. And I did start playing music when I was a kid. And thanks to the New York City public school system at the time, you had to take either band or orchestra. So I was musical instrument inclined. I'm one of those crazy people who feel like I should be able to just pick up any musical instrument, no matter what, and play it. And I just do. And I played them all very poorly when I did that. But ultimately, played the banjo for a while. When I was a kid, people always said, well, you're playing the bassoon. You should be playing the cello too, because it's complementary. So that was my excuse for buying a mandolin and saying, oh, it's complementary. That's why I'm getting this instrument. And loved it and played it. And then someone said, oh, by the way, did you know that fiddle and mandolin have the same fingering? I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And then I made the huge error of picking up a fiddle and getting absolutely hooked. It's my spirit instrument, and that's all I really want to play. Occasionally, I look at my banjos and say, I really should play those once in a while, but that's about it. The podcast, on the other hand, mainly took place when I retired about a year ago, and my wonderful wife, Ruth, said, Mike, get involved with something. You're going to go nuts if you don't. And I was already jamming a lot and loved the jam community. I was really impressed with how Brooklyn is an epicenter of bluegrass. It's interesting to me that this sort of highly urban metropolitan borough is the bluegrass borough, and why are all these musicians here, and why are all this music and these jams? And you have to choose which of 2 or 3 jams you go to in a night. And so then the idea, well, let me grab my iPhone and make this amateurish podcast thing and see what that's like. And I got a couple of people lined up and recorded them, and I'm sure they're almost as embarrassed as me at the way they sound. But that was the start of Bluegrass Brooklyn. But Liz, where it really started taking off was when you and I shook hands up at Ashoka and said, let's partner with this thing. So let me turn the question back to you. What prompted you from your idyllic jamming business coach lifestyle?
Well, what most impresses me with your story, Mike, is that your wife encouraged you to do it. I don't know that my husband would have said, you know what, Liz, you need one more thing to do. So why don't you become the co-host of a podcast?
Yep.
And I've always wanted to have a podcast anyway, just to be a podcast host. I've been on a bunch of podcasts in my life, but mostly more related to my business world, and which bluegrass is becoming more and more of the business world. Mm-hmm. And then decided, what's more fun than more fun, right? If it has to do with bluegrass. Yeah. So Kieth, what's the situation for you in terms of there you were and you decided you were going to start a podcast? Did your significant other suggest that to you?
I don't know that she suggested it, but she was absolutely supportive. So I'll say that right off the bat. No, it was a confluence of other factors. I had been playing banjo for a while in working bands. I was in a band called Lindsay Lou and the Flatbellies. A lot of people might be familiar with Lindsay Lou. She's gone on to do great things, but my personal situation was going more toward family life. I had some young kids. So as the band I was in started touring more, my involvement, of course, became less. So here I was with this desk job, kind of feeling down on myself for not really having too many gigs anymore because my band moved away. And I guess I was just desperate to feel like I was still relevant or still had my foot in the bluegrass community, which I loved being a part of. And then at the same time, having this desk job, I listened to a lot of podcasts. And of course, you seek out your interests. And I was pretty shocked and disappointed to realize that there weren't really any banjo podcasts. So between wanting to still be part of the greater banjo and bluegrass community and also being sad that there wasn't a banjo podcast, it just struck me one day that maybe I should just be the one to make both of those things happen. So I tried it. And yeah, I guess it went okay because here I am like almost 9 years later.
You've had the opportunity to really grow your audience and get some positive feedback. You're 7.5 years ahead of where we are. When did you feel like that started to really take a grip and get things expanding?
I mean, honestly, right away. I was pretty lucky. I'll pat myself on the back for recognizing that if I wanted there to be a banjo podcast, then chances are there's other people out there who are going to be happy that one comes along. And so at that point, it was just a matter of trying to do it well, trying to do it justice, trying to really make it something that I would have been happy to find if I were just on the listener end of it. And that part's, of course, always a work in progress, always trying to improve in various ways. But yeah, as soon as I started publicizing it, I would see my listener numbers go up and up. And definitely once I started being able to get guests on, it's pretty much an interview-based podcast. I guess I didn't mention that. The vast majority are interviews. So once I started getting famous banjo players, sounds like an oxymoron of a phrase, but once I started getting famous banjo players as my guests, that really started the ball rolling in terms of getting the show some credibility and some status.
So famous banjo players aren't exactly coming out of the woodwork, but there sure are a lot of really, really amazing banjo players out there. Yeah. And of course, your podcast is a very specific banjo niche, whereas Bluegrass Brooklyn is broader. So yeah, I mean, are there enough famous banjo players out there 9 years later to keep your interviewing going?
There are, and I do get asked that question periodically, and what I usually say is, fortunately, time makes more of them. By the time I've interviewed everyone who I could have thought of 8 years ago, in the meantime, there's a whole new generation of them that have come up in the meantime. And then I am very niche in terms of banjo related, but even within the banjo community, you have banjo builders or pick manufacturers. I've interviewed people who are even on what the fringes of the banjo world might be. So No, it wasn't too difficult. And another cool thing about realizing some amount of success with the show is that I feel like I can also prioritize. In the past, I'd always waited for banjo players to come to me, whether from touring schedules or whatnot. And then I realized that not every banjo player was going to come to me. And I started making a point to do some of these road trips to go get interviews on location. And that's how I got interviews with like Ben Eldridge shortly before he passed. He wasn't a touring musician at that point. He was in, frankly, fairly rough shape, and he wasn't going to show up anywhere close to me. So I was really lucky that I made a point to do that. So it's a mix of strategies, I guess.
So for you, Mike, what kind of a guest is appealing to you? What has you choose who you're inviting on to the podcast?
Well, that's a great question, Liz, and especially listening to Kieth and his ability to focus on a very specific niche. We at Bluegrass Brooklyn, as you know, we're a little bit less specific. I guess if I divided the guests up, I would say we have major or nationally known musicians. So we've had Jason Carter and Michael Cleveland and Allison Brown and on different instruments, although I did notice that you play bass and I play fiddle. There seems to be a bias.
I noticed that myself.
Bass and fiddle players. And also we tend to cluster around themes. We have a very popular and interesting theme of women in bluegrass, which you introduced. We have homegrown, locally known, where these are artists that we see around the jam circles, but maybe someone in Minnesota or Florida has never heard of them, but maybe they should. We also have spoken to the next generation. We have a 10-year-old guitarist, singer, V.A. Park, around here. We've interviewed her. And also we've been lucky enough to get to speak to members, either multiple or single, of pretty well-known bands like East Nash Grass and so on. But we also do a lot of episodes that have to do with festivals, music camps. We've covered iconic venues. We've gone up to Ashoka. There's a local venue here, Cowgirl Seahorse, and other places where you mentioned Jalopy Theater or Mona's Monday Night Jam to almost anyone in the nation, and they'll say, yeah, I've heard of it. People mention those places to me. So I think what we've settled on is everything about the music we love, both the people, the places. We have talked to fiddle builders. We've talked to recording studio engineers, everybody around the music. But we also sometimes do shows on music we also love, like Quebecois music that we have, or Cajun or old time or related, not only bluegrass. So what I would summarize is what we get excited about and we're interested in talking about, learning about, or sharing with the listeners guides the guest strategy. It makes for a hellish season planning, though, I'll tell you that.
Yes, fantastic job. One thing, Kieth, so you're on your own. When I say that, I mean you don't have a co-host.
Yeah, I'm very much on my own. I don't have a co-host. I don't have, as we talked about before we started recording, I don't have a social media team. I don't have an editor. It's a one-man shop. And of course, I enlist friends for help. Like, for example, my logo was designed by Grace Fanthoff, who is a multiple-time IBMA Graphic Designer of the Year, so I'm very proud to have that. So I might hire some things out here and there, but no, in terms of the day-to-day operations, if you email the show, I'm the one who looks at it and hopefully responds to you. I edit, I host, and yeah, it's all me, for better or worse.
And to go back to what Mike asked me earlier, what inspired me to join the podcast as a co-host, and one of the questions that he asked me was, would you be interested in participating in any of the production? To which my answer was no. And he still said that's okay, and he would do it all. So I get to do some really fun stuff. Not that I don't do any of the background work, but I'm grateful for that. Kieth, what would you say for you then is the most challenging part for you of hosting this podcast?
A couple things. One of them being the discipline. When it is just me, I don't feel as bad if I go a bit longer between episodes than I wanted to. Whereas I'm the type of person where if I felt like I was letting someone else down who's on my team, that would put a lot more pressure on me and maybe get better results. So finding the time and the discipline to be regimented about the production is a challenge. The interviewing itself was a challenge. I'm not an amazing player, but I'm a good banjo player, so I knew enough about the instrument. I had worked in musical instrument retail at Elderly Instruments for a long time, so I knew about the gear, I knew about the music, I knew about playing the instrument. Felt like I had the knowledge to approach this project, but I didn't have journalism skills. I never went to any class about how to be a good interviewer or anything like that. So that was really just off the cuff kind of stuff by the seat of my pants. So I still view that as my main area of potential growth.
Yeah, and it's understandable. Again, in the partnership with Mike, that once we set a schedule, then I don't want to be the one who didn't do the graphic in time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You know, there's been the occasional time that I haven't kept my end of the deal. Not very often, no. So you're right. And so counter to that, Keith, what do you find to be the most rewarding part of having this podcast?
Well, it's really just the thing that I set out to do, which was still maintain some sort of role in the banjo and the bluegrass community, and to some extent, even creating my own community around the podcast. I have a Patreon system where people support me through that, and there's a Facebook group where some things get discussed. And so it's really cool getting to meet some of my heroes. Bluegrass is always very accessible that way, but having the podcast as a pretext is a nice way to insert myself into getting to know some of these people who I really look up to as musicians and as people in general. So that's been really cool. I mean, the fact that Alan Mundy knows who I am is like beyond what my wildest dreams would have been when I started playing the instrument, and same true for any number of other banjo players. And then the fact that I've made something that people are thankful for in the banjo community. It just feels good because I've gotten a lot out of bluegrass and out of these banjo players that I look up to. So if I'm doing any kind of service that is a piece to that whole puzzle, then that feels really good.
And how about you, Mike? What are you finding to be the most rewarding aspects of running Bluegrass BKLYN?
There's a couple of things. I feel like we provide a real service. When we publish an episode and it's got, let's say, a homegrown, locally known artist. For example, we have this duet couple in the area called Raven and Red. They're incredible singers, great musicians. They're gigging around in the New York area, but it's tough. But also, we open the show with their music. We close the show with their music. We put links to their music in our program notes. It really helps them. It helps spread it around. It opened my eyes at IBMA, where I was, again, very accessible bigwigs, but bigwigs nonetheless of the IBMA organization. And all of them said, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the service you're providing. And I did a little double take the first time or two, but I reflected on it and said, yeah, you know what? We actually do go out of our way to provide that service. So I find that very, very gratifying, meeting my heroes. And I spent 30 years in large financial institutions doing all kinds of background roles. So I like the production, assembly, release, processing stuff. All the stuff that you don't want to do, I like doing, which is fortunate.
Works for me.
And as far as challenge is concerned, frankly, the main challenge I have, we started off with an episode every other week. That's when you joined, it was every other week. And we said, maybe on this off week, we could do a quick 15 or 20 minute, not heavily edited. Yeah, right. So now we had weekly. Then we said, you know what? We have all this incredible content, and frankly, it can go stale if someone sits around for 18 months. So why don't we do these quick, not too much work, just quick recording, not too much editing Monday editions? And we've been doing those, and yeah, right, they're now fully produced. So basically doing 2 episodes a week. And frankly, it's tough to get everything we want to do in our 12-week schedule. So that's a real challenge for me, because I would love to just blurt this stuff out and have it come out all the time. But how about you, Liz? Same question.
Well, I think maybe Keith can relate to this a bit, is that luckily I make no assumptions about your daily life, Mike, but being retired does make a slight difference in your time availability and how you can use your time. And I know, Keith, you mentioned still being employed at a quote desk job. You know, I also run a business. And so there is always that side obligation, like maybe I should be doing something other than bluegrass. Is that true for you, Keith?
I mean, I do have that devil on my shoulder a little bit, but no, mine's the other way. Mine is try to find any excuse I can to do as little of the desk job and maximize the banjo stuff, whether it's the podcast or playing the instrument or whatever else I can do, as long as I can justify it by hopefully it makes me some sort of income in order to justify ignoring my grown-up responsibilities.
For sure, monetizing the podcast is something that we would all want to have be something which is abundant enough that would have us be able to do less of that part and more of this part. Kieth, you mentioned that when you were 12, podcasts didn't even exist. And I think it's interesting how it is an avenue with which potential income can occur that wasn't even possible many years ago. And a lot of people make plenty of money doing podcasts. So what do you see for your future in your podcast, Kieth?
You know, good question. We were talking about how if I just had all the time in the world, I would probably do some extra things such as videos or just more frequent content. And I have plenty of ideas in terms of different ways to approach different types of episodes. And it's really just a zero-sum resources kind of thing at this point where I just don't have either the mental bandwidth or the time resources to make them happen. But yeah, I have a few big ideas and we'll see if I ever get around to doing them.
Yeah. Well, you have young children, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, they're not as young as I was referring to from back in 2016. Or if I ever listen back to some of my early episodes, people used to compliment me that I had a soothing voice. And it was really just because I had to wait until everyone was in bed to record my podcast. So by then I was exhausted from my day and also had to speak softly to not wake anyone up. So I have this very NPR hushed kind of tone. And in the years since, I've become more of like radio guy, trying to up the enthusiasm a little bit. But that's the reason for that.
Yes. So same question for you, Mike. When you dream into the future, what comes up for you? Maybe I should know the answer to this question since I'm a part of it.
I think you kind of do. We both aspire to bring a lot of our content to more people just to spread the love of the music. That's the Brooklyn way. We want to have more and more people get a chance to hear a conversation with Alison Brown or Jason Carter or 10-year-old Rie Park or professor of philosophy / banjo player Matt Lindauer, who, you know, is an incredibly hot banjo player. Probably no one outside of this tri-state area knows, but should. And that's really exciting for me. I spent, like I said, a good 30 some odd years in large financial institutions, but mostly in the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing realm, which meant I was always very engaged and sitting on the edge of my seat and figuring out new ways and being entrepreneurial about how can we be better at what we're doing here. Of course, it's a very necessary thing. And I like coming up with stuff. For example, we do an audio-only podcast now, and we're talking about adding video. We're talking about doing short takes for Instagram and TikTok. We're talking about adding a Patreon site and who knows what. And last but not least is we as an entity, that is Bluegrass Brooklyn, have relationships with PR companies, record labels, talent managers, bands, actually artists. And those relationships are very important to me, at least. That's more of that is what I'm really hoping we can bring the show to.
Okay, so last question for both of you. Think on this. For someone who is no longer living that you could not interview, is there a guest in your fantasy, Kieth, you would love to go back and interview, and who would that be?
Well, of course, it would have to be Earl Scruggs with honorable mention to J.D. Crowe and maybe Sonny Osborne and some of those great legends. But for what I'm doing, Earl's the guy. And there's not really any close second. Yeah, that's an easy one.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Mike?
That's a hard one for me. I would love to hear Bill Monroe's story about how he got from kind of old-time fiddly kind of music that and songs he sang in his country home to a jazz, blues, country, you name it, infusion called bluegrass. That would be fascinating to really explore.
Well, I think for me, it would be Hazel Dickens. I don't think that's a surprise answer.
Cool.
But to hear about her journey and discoveries and being such a incredible trailblazer as all of these people were. Well, thank you
Great
both
question.
for sharing your love of bluegrass and banjos with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this Bluegrass BKLYN podcast episode.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for what you do.
Thanks for having me, Liz. So here we are with Liz Rabson Schnore and Christian Apuzzo. Christian, Liz, thanks for joining.
Hello. Yeah. Hi.
It's good to have you both here. There are some jams that go on in our bluegrass borough that have a lot of influence and impact on how the community here in the bluegrass borough gets together and stays together. And today we're going to focus on the Boathouse Jam, which is hosted by the Gowanus Dredgers here in Brooklyn. Liz is the host. Christian is the leader. So I think we got the right people here. Let's start here. Liz, what is the Boathouse Jam?
There's actually two. There's the Bluegrass Jam, which are known as the Boathouse Bluegrass Jam. Wednesday nights, 6 till 8:30, April through October, every Wednesday night. Then we also have a Tuesday night jam, which is a jug and string band jam, which is smaller, but also a wonderful jam.
Cool. So, Christian, first of all, let's acknowledge you. You were our first guest here on the podcast. Welcome back. So you're a returner.
Yes. Good to be back.
You're the primary jam leader. Tell me about that responsibility and what that involves for you.
I've been the jam leader since 2021, and this is 26 now, so it's been quite some time. And over the years, it's grown in size. It's grown very, very big. So it's my responsibility to hold things down musically, make sure things don't get too crazy with tempo-wise, and also be a little bit of a jam policeman, if you will, in calling what is appropriate for the style and see how we can get by successfully for 2 hours and a half.
Here in New York, our jams are large and loud. So it really is up to the jam leader to get people to tone down a little bit so you can hear the singer and the soloist and all that. Yeah, and having experienced the jams, you run a tight ship, which is great. Also, full disclosure, I'll also mention that this is the first jam I really attended with any regularity. So it's all your fault that the world is now stuck with me in the jam circle. Liz, we're hosted by the Gowanus Dredgers, and I think if anybody knows a little bit, the little bit they'll know is that the Gowanus Canal is a super fun site that people, generally speaking, avoid like the plague. But here we are sitting there every Wednesday night next to it, making beautiful music. So tell us a little bit about the Dredgers.
So the Gowanus Dredgers Canoe Club. The Canoe Club actually started in 1999, and the Dredgers are there to empower people to care for the Gowanus Canal through advocacy and conservation and through education, and they promote waterfront stewardship. Around 2019, Owen Foote, who started the Dredgers, knowing that I was a musician, said, hey, let's start having some music on the canal. While we have people canoeing, it would be great to have a jam going on. So he put the idea in my head. We gave us the space. And so I started putting it out into the world. Really, it started during COVID. Mike Clifford was our first jam leader that year, and then Christian took over the next year. And it's really just been amazing. And the Dredgers, it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship for the Dredgers because it brings awareness to the canal. But also, you know, it's great for the music community, for people being able to sit their butts down in a chair and play music together is invaluable. And musicians like Christian, who are really dedicated towards music education and teaching people how to jam politely and learn to use their ears and listen, it's invaluable, I think.
So, Christian, to make sure people are aware, you're a professional musician, but I think you count your role as an educator as an important part of your musical life. We often enough get interjections of the history or the stylistic nuances of songs that get called, which has built my awareness up. But I have to ask you, given how large and how popular the Boathouse Jam is. What is it about the jamming and jamming community that you think brings people together so regularly and so reliably?
Now, too, more than ever since I've been in the scene, I think there's a lot of more people jamming every single year. And I think what any person listening to the style of music, put on anybody singing Bury Me Beneath the Willow Tree to any person who's ever heard music before, and it would just seem very accessible. It sounds like, oh, I can kind of understand that. I think a lot of people hear bluegrass music and folk music in general and just sort of relate to it. Maybe jazz or classical music or some things that are a little bit more complicated and theoretical might confuse some folks, especially with people with no background in music or any training. But in bluegrass music, it sounds accessible already. And then, you come down to any old jam and come down to the canal one day and you say, oh, that person can do it. Me too, then, And it's an infection in that sort of way where it sounds easy, or it sounds like you could do it, and then it looks also fun to participate, and then it's a snowball effect, and that's why this jam has, I think, become so popular. Also, the site that it's at, it's outdoors, it's not at a bar, unlike other 90% of the jams out there. So yeah, it's at a very accessible spot for everybody.
So again, I want to recognize that you're a professional musician, and sometimes you're unable to make it because you're on tour, you have a gig. And we get other professional musicians. We've had Hillary Hawk, who's been on the show, as well as Rick Snell and others who step in. And these are, our top tier professionals here. How is it that we have you guys sitting with us for a couple of hours once a week at the Boathouse?
Oh, well, it was definitely more about the communal aspect in the beginning. I really wanted to get things started and get this jam off the ground and get my name out there in that sort of way of, jam leader, educator, what have you, If anything, a guy like me will be there to lead the jam. And those other folks are in my Rolodex of people who I like to play with. Me and Hillary have a long history ever since I started playing professionally in 2017. She's helped me out a lot. And, as you said that you learned a lot of stuff from coming to the Gowanus Jam a few years ago, I've learned a lot of stuff by going to jams, and Rick Snell, who hosts Mona's, taught me a whole bunch of stuff when I was first learning how to play this style in the early 2010s, I guess. So those two people, they're more than happy to do it too. But yeah, it's a nice little incentive too to get a little bit of money for my heavy lifting some weeks, I guess. A little bit of financial compensation goes a long way. And with the growing jam, we need to pay a bass player as well.
Right.
We need to pay an additional jam leader sometimes because there's 30 plus people. And, you said before it's loud and our New York jams are big, but in an attempt to sort of cut down on that population size per circle, we want to hire more professional musicians and that can lead the jam and, help it bring everybody else up,
Yeah, I've been there any number of times where you and Liz agree, okay, we've reached critical mass, let's split up, and the amoeba thing happens, and now we have 2, maybe even 3 groups going. And that helps a lot, and I think enhances the enjoyment of everybody involved. But Liz, how is it the jam or the dredgers can afford the monetary compensation? I'm sure it's not extravagant, but it's, even if it's anything like appropriate, that can add up. So how does that happen?
Just to back up just a little bit, I wanted to say, it's always been very important to me that we pay the professional musicians. It not only provides us with a service of having somebody who can lead a jam and keep us on track, but also having grown up in a musician's family, know that having a little steady income, even if it's, I kind of call it a stipend more than anything, but it's a, monthly, regular income is very valuable. So we wanted to create that for some of our musicians that are supporting the jam. So we do that through fundraising, which right now we're in full fundraising mode. The fundraiser has been really actually a fun project. If you check us out on Instagram and Facebook, the Boathouse Jam, you'll see I posted some videos of the point of the fundraiser and how to sign up. If you go to Instagram, there is a link to donate. All the money goes to pay for musicians. The Dredgers are an all volunteer organization. I'm a volunteer. There are no paid members other than our musicians. Some other artist programs that we have.
We'll also put the donation link into the program notes for people who want to participate in that. And I know that we want to encourage people, if they can give $5 or $500 or $5,000, whatever, anything is going to help keep the music playing. So before we conclude, so Christian, the Boathouse Jam is really special. We all recognize it here in Brooklyn and around the city as one of the central and important jams. People get their start there. People keep involved there. What do you, in your mind, think is the most special or important thing about it?
I like to see all the people coming out of the woodwork to the jam. I like to see the people who say they like bluegrass, and I say, "Who are you? You know, I've never seen you around before." I've been in the city for years, and I was like, "Oh wow, well, it took you this long to discover us. Well, welcome." And then maybe I'll see them at my jam. Then next week I'll be at another jam at Sunny's or Mona's, and I'll see them in the audience or something. And I'm like, "Oh, great, another friend." There's a lot of people like that, and that's the communal aspect that we have going at the Gowanus Jam. Usually you see everyone down at the Gowanus Jam at some point.
Yeah, it really is a hub. It really is.
Yeah.
So, Liz, same question to you.
So for me, my favorite thing about the jam personally is just being able to sit my butt down in a chair for 2.5 hours, actually twice a week for me, because I go to both jams, and just play music with people and connect on that level, the brain to brain with, through music, the sound. It's an analog way to unplug from my daily life. And I love being around Christian and Sam Dallas and Alex Dean, and like all the people I've met through the jam has been a wonderful experience.
Absolutely. And music is definitely the great unifying force in the universe. That's for sure.
Yep.
And we contribute there. All right, guys, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. I hope that we'll get some people to come down to the jam. Anybody cares to contribute, that's great. But even more important is come down, join in, participate with, and support the community.
Again, my name is Liz Wolfe. Please subscribe to our podcast and follow us on our social media so you never miss an episode. You can find us online at bluegrassbrooklyn.com. Brooklyn is spelled BKLYN. See you around the jam circle.